Right, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday morning to hear the latest in our series of Talking Public Sector discussions. My name is Astrid Spink, and I am the Sectors and Communities Manager for the Public and Health Sectors for ACCA in the UK. It's my job to work with members within these sectors to build community and to provide engagement opportunities. And one of the ways that I do this is working with our public and not-for-profit sector panel, three members of which I have on the call this morning. Before we get started, I would just like to ask you to go on mute if you are not speaking, just to avoid any background noise. And also, if you can come on camera, it would be good to see you. So please do share your face if you are able to and happy to. This morning's session is our central government special. We'll be looking at financial reporting and finance business partnering within central government with our two speakers this morning, Anna Hudson, who is currently working at ACAS, and Michelle Gurung. So I'll now hand over to Anna and Michelle to take us through the presentation this morning.
Morning, everyone. So thank you, Astrid, for inviting us here today. So I was going to talk about the financial reporting side of working in central government, and then Michelle will come on to talk about finance business partnering. So as Astrid said, I've recently started a new job, just in the last couple of weeks, working as head of financial accounting at ACAS, the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, which is a non-departmental public body that sits in the Department of Business and Trade's consolidation group. Prior to that, and where I'm kind of drawing most of my experience from for this discussion today, is my role as Assistant Head of Financial Reporting at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, also known as BEIS, so you'll hear me referring to it as BEIS sometimes. And the department was broken up through a machinery of government change back in February. So I'll also talk a bit about how that impacted on the operations and on the team later on in the session. In this role, I was also a member of the Cross Whitehall Technical Accounting Centre of Excellence Working Group, also known as TACO, which makes it sound a little bit more exciting than it actually is. But I'd really wanted to sort of mention that here to encourage any of my sort of central government colleagues that are on the line to bear them in mind as a great source of technical accounting advice and knowledge. Anyone working for central government can get in touch with them. If you look for their details on the government finance function website, you can submit sort of accounting questions to them, and the group review the questions and come back, and it's quite useful to hear what other departments are doing where you're sort of stuck on a technical bit of accounting, and can help with discussions with the National Audit Office if you've kind of got some additional backup as to what the rest of Whitehall are doing for similar accounting challenges. So let's go on to the next slide, please, Astrid. So I was just going to talk a little bit about the role. So we obviously produce and lay ideally unqualified audited consolidated accounts. The BEIS consolidation group had about 40 bodies reporting into it, and a materiality of just in excess of 500 million. So it's quite big numbers. The FREM is obviously your Bible. For anyone who already works in central government will know that, but for those that don't, that's the Treasury Financial Reporting Manual, which provides the interpretation of the IFRSs for the public sector. And there's a whole rainbow of colours of illustrative accounts depending on the type of body you are. Excuse me. Department yellow was for departmental accounts. So that was really useful and updated annually. Other documents that we regularly reference were consolidated budget guidance and managing public money, but there's quite a lot of guidance out there that Treasury produce. I think one of the biggest challenges of working in the central government landscape, or certainly for a policy focused department, is sort of working on the consolidation group, and that the consolidation group is defined by the Office of National Statistics using international statistical frameworks, which have a sort of broader definition of control than traditional IFRS. So sort of regulatory changes, government intervention can trigger organisations coming into the consolidation group. So you're always working with a changing group, and you don't necessarily have the full picture at the outset of the year either. So kind of a few examples of where we've kind of had to adapt for this change is at the end of November last year, the government purchased a 50% stake in the Sizewell C nuclear the Sizewell C construction company, which is a new nuclear power station. That 50% purchase brought it into the central government and into the consolidation group. So we had to sort of onboard them and bring them into the consolidation group. Interestingly as well, because it was so late and it was quite uncertain whether the shares were actually going to be purchased until they were purchased, because the project was happening, but it kept getting pushed back. So we weren't sure, is it going to be this year, is it going to be next year? So as it was late November, we missed the amendment order deadline. So the amendment order sets the group in a statutory instrument that Treasury prepare and lay. So we missed the statutory instrument group, that's the statutory instrument deadline that sets the group. So then we had to go on to talk to Treasury to get a specific accounts direction to bring Sizewell C into the consolidation group. So that was kind of a bit of a last minute challenge. And that was sort of December, January time last year. So we were quite close to the wire. Another example of where the consolidation group changed is that Companies House was reclassified to central government, I think maybe 3 years ago, and their ONS backdated their decision to the setup of Companies House, which was 100 odd years ago. So we had to bring Companies House into the consolidation group and restate prior year to make it look like it had always been in the consolidation group. Another example is that Bulb Energy this year has been reclassified to central government, so that will be coming into the Department of Energy and Net Zero's consolidation group for 23-24. So again, that's one that's really as a result of government intervention, where government intervened within the energy market, and an entity was brought in. So it's tricky because you're also, for some of those, you're transferring going concerns in. So there's like an acquisition impact. So you've got to work through how that works in budgeting and how that looks correct and looks right from a sort of public sector reporting perspective. And then you've also got to be aware throughout the year that there might be new policy coming out that's incorporating new bodies, setting them up, and you've got to bring them into the public sector as well. So I think in February this year, ARIA, the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, was set up, and so that will be coming into the Department of Science, Innovation and Technologies consolidation group this year. There was a sort of timing issue that was set up in February, so it had missed the amendment order, so it didn't go into the consolidation group last year. But because it was an immaterial element, it would just be brought in this year instead. So yeah, that's kind of an example. I suppose 2 examples there. One, Sizewell C, which was big and we brought in, and then ARIA, which we'll bring in next year. And all of anything that's within central government is subject to Cabinet Office controls and managing public money. So that's another sort of challenge, which is potentially a bit more of a challenge on the finance business partner side, but making sure that entities that come in are adhering to Cabinet Office controls. And that can be quite challenging when you're working with something like a 50% stake rather than 100% stake, and something coming in as a result of government intervention and not necessarily planned. So that's a bit about the role. If we go on to the next slide, please, Astrid. Thank you. So I just want to talk about a few skills required as well. So technical accounting, audit experience, project management. All those I think are not a surprise. Delivering at pace won't be a surprise either, but sort of something to note on the prep of accounts. And I think anyone working in sort of large entities will understand that, you know, you have to balance materiality against delivery, and be really mindful of that, especially where in central government the aim and the expectation is that you lay your accounts before Parliament ahead of the summer recess. So you're working to have your audited accounts designed and ready to share with the public in July, which is quite a quick turnaround, really. And then the last thing I've put on here is stakeholder engagement, which again is really key when working on consolidation, because there's 40 partner organisations across the group. Some of them are statutory bodies, some of them don't receive any funding from the department. So when you're requiring reporting, you've got to make sure they're bought into that and delivering good reporting on time. Otherwise, it can really scupper your accounts prep. So that was a very short run through of the skills required. I'm sure none of that will be that a surprise. So if we go on to the next slide then, please. Thank you. So I just want to talk a bit about the process of the consolidation group, of the consolidation. I think this works differently in different departments. I thought it was kind of interesting for colleagues on the line to find out about what happened at Bays particularly. So all arm's length bodies can go through a process of onboarding when they come into the department, where we map their local chart of accounts to our chart of accounts, look through their accounting policies and identify any alignment journals. Companies outside of central government, the wider consolidation group might be straight IFRS reporters that don't apply the FREM, or FRS 102, or charities applying charity sort. There's only a handful that are different, but all of those might require alignment journals to bring their accounts to align with the reporting requirements of the FREM. So there are quite a few alignment journals that are needed. And also through that process, you can identify any eliminations that might be required as well. We report interim, so that's period 9 accounts. They're audited, well, it's an interim audit. And then we produce final accounts as well, which are obviously audited. At the final stage, we collect data and ideally just produce 2 versions. So we collect data from the group on around the 20th of April, and that's for the outturn reporting. And then we collect the sort of version 2 later down the line, which will hopefully bring in some audit adjustments that the partner organisations will have got in their accounts. Something to note that since COVID, the department I worked for, so Bays, laid post-parliamentary recess. There was various complications that resulted in us laying late, but the first year it wasn't planned. So it was very busy for the team the whole way through. The second couple of years, it was planned that it would be a post-summer recess late, so we could collect that version 2 data a little bit later. And that was really helpful because it captured more of the audit adjustments than sort of gunning for the July lay, which generally meant we were collecting data from the partner organisations at the end of May, which some of them still had more, big audits to go through at that point. So in terms of what we collect at those times, the arm's length bodies submit a trial balance, any non-trial balance data that goes into the narrative, and then intra-group transactions that are called counterparty transactions. Bays have got a system called EPM that everyone submits online. All the arm's length bodies get logins, and ideally it's all quite smooth and quite system driven. The system's got some validations built in, so that's quite handy, some sort of sense checks, and then the team also do further robust sense checks. post the alignment journals, and then go on to prepare the notes and prepare the accounts. Additional things to consider are materiality. So I mentioned earlier, in excess of 500 million, so pretty big, but you've got to keep an eye on your consolidation group throughout, because there may be material adjustments outside of that version 1 and version 2 collection, particularly, you know, after the version 2 collection, there might be material adjustments that you need to bring in. And related to that, timings of audit. So our consolidation group had some material components within it. So the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority was huge, Low Carbon Contracts Company, pretty huge, and UK Research and Innovation was pretty huge. So they needed to be signed off ahead of us laying our accounts. So we were very dependent on them completing their audits as well, and making sure that we were reflecting anything material that goes through in them in our accounts. The other thing to kind of be aware of is any post-balance sheet events. So at any time, and when you're coming towards laying, it's always a bit tense because you don't know what's going to happen. Where there might be policy announcements that you need to reflect and record as post-balance sheet events. And last year, I think we actually laid on the same day, on the morning that Liz Truss I think she was appointed as PM on the Tuesday, and then she started making some policy announcement on the Thursday, and we had laid that morning. So we were thinking, thank goodness we laid just before all those policy announcements came. And then very sadly, the Queen died that same day. So it's quite sort of strange. Then if we'd have missed that deadline, then we'd have not been able to lay. Obviously, you know, you couldn't push that back during the period of mourning. So there's sort of quite a lot kind of wider in the wider landscape, political landscape that you're working to, and no one really cares in the sort of politics. No one's going to stop making their policy announcement to allow the Bayes account to be laid. They're going to be ploughing ahead and announcing their policy at the appropriate time. So you've just got to hope that you lay the timing of lay is fine, and there's no big announcements 2 days before you need to get your accounts laid. And obviously, just a sort of broad note is that there's quite a lot of accountability reporting in department accounts. So the accounts are quite lengthy and have to include everything that needs to be laid before Parliament above and beyond what the Companies Act requires. So it is quite a detailed piece of work. Okay, then on to the next slide, please, Astrid. Okay, so this is my final slide, and I just wanted to kind of pull out a few of the challenges in preparing such a large set of accounts. I think for Bayes, one thing that I wanted to talk about was the nuclear decommissioning provision, which, as I mentioned, is huge, and you end up with huge swings based on discount rate change. So you probably can't quite see the text there, but I've just done a little snippet from the Bayes account showing the SOCNI, the Statement of Comprehensive Net Expenditure. And so this was 2019, but this was quite a good example of when the discount rate changed so much that it kind of really messes the figures up or makes the figures optically look really strange, and you need to know a bit more to really interpret them properly. So the provision expense was a credit of 97 billion in 2019, and the year before it had been a debit of 75 billion, which is the majority of the SOCNI movement in the year. So throughout your report, you've got to be very aware to position that SOCNI result as a result of discount rate change, and try and explain that in an accessible way for anyone to be able to pick up the accounts, flick through, and kind of get a feel as to why that change was happening, and almost discount it because it is just a provision discount rate change. It doesn't matter in the same way. It's not spend, it's not income. That's something we always were fighting against. Well, not fighting against, but it was always difficult to balance the length of the report against the accessibility. So it's a very long report, and you want to include all the disclosures to explain and all the narrative to make it user-friendly and readable and not over-disclose. And our audit and risk committee always challenged us on the length of it and said, what can we get rid of? How can we make this more accessible? And that was something we were always mindful of, and it was always difficult to balance. I think that provision rate, the provision swing was just a great example of where it's really challenging, and it's not the number you want to pull out, but it's the biggest number on the books. So another challenge for 23-24 is that the FREM has changed, or will be changing. I think it's going to be released in December, but FRAB have approved an expansion of an existing adaptation, which is adaptation 4. That I've snipped and put in the slide there, but it's essentially an adaptation that was put in to allow BEIS to report the financial guarantees around the COVID loan schemes. It wasn't applying straight IFRS didn't really achieve a true and fair presentation of the liability the government needed to show. So we worked with Treasury, and this adaptation was put in. It's now being expanded from just financial guarantees to all financial instruments. And that will bring about £90 billion onto the government's balance sheet related to contract for differences. So contract for differences are contracts incentivising developers of renewable technology, and it effectively guarantees a strike price for a developer of renewables, so that when they're doing their appraisal of whether it's worth going ahead with putting up these wind turbines, they get a fixed rate, a fixed strike price for electricity, rather than having to deal with the fluctuations. And the future liability of that in total is around 90 billion, but applying IFRS 9, sorry, it's not, the total's not 90 billion. I think the total's about 120 billion. And at the moment, we're recognising about 30 billion of that. So applying IFRS 9, we deferred differences, and so we're disclosing that 120 billion pounds in the narrative, but we're not accounting for it because of IFRS 9. So this will bring that that full liability onto the balance sheet, and arguably rightly so. But that's obviously a bit of a challenge going into next year. And a note of that is that low carbon contract company hold these contract for differences. They're within the BEIS group, or the Department of Energy's group, sorry. But they apply straight IFRS rather than the FREM. So this adaptation will be applied in the group accounts, but not in their own accounts. They've got all the data. It's essentially one number that we're already disclosing. So it's just one alignment journal that will need to be put through, but it's a really big alignment journal, and everyone will need to get comfortable with the presentation. Another thing to mention was the COVID grant provision. So in 1920, I thought this was quite an interesting one. The Chancellor announced in March that there'd be a grant scheme for businesses to help with COVID support. The scheme wasn't actually launched until after the year end, so the department initially went in hoping, and I think that, there was a good justification for recognising it, not recognising it in 1920 books because it had happened post year end, but the NAO were very keen on that provision being recognised. And actually, when we looked at it, some of the grants had already been paid pre-year end. So the sort of announcement of the Chancellor, and also a couple of the grants, kind of emergency grants going through, being paid ahead of the scheme being announced, was enough to require us to recognise the £10 billion provision and later a breach of control totals, so a qualification in the accounts. I was going to mention, I'm just going to speak for a couple more minutes because I don't want to take up too much time, but hopefully, Michelle, you don't mind me going on for a bit more. I'm kind of aware I'm going over slightly. Regularity of spend, I think, is an interesting one. any irregular spend is material by nature. And I always find throughout the audit, there's something that's happened somewhere that in the consolidation group, so not necessarily in the department, where there's a bit of a debate about whether it was a regular spend or regular. And when I come across these, they're very small, you know, maybe £1 million, maybe slightly less than £1 million. And there's a grey area element, you know, it's arguably regular spend, but perhaps this bit wasn't. And I always find that there's always something hanging around that may qualify the accounts up until the point that they're signed, and quite often those things are resolved by the time you get to sign the accounts. But there's always something, and I don't want to go into detail because it's potentially confidential. But ultimately, those things that I've seen have kind of been resolved, and it's been fine. But there always seems to be something that is hanging around. Anyone that works on their accounts will kind of know what I mean, that there's always something the National Audit Office are worried about that's small, bit out of your control, and you're just kind of monitoring it and hoping that it goes away. The final thing I'll just talk about is the machinery of government change. So in February, the PM announced BEIS was going to be split into 3 new departments, and there was going to be a bit of a reshuffle, moving some of DCMS's work into one area, moving so Cabinet Office in Department of International Trade was merged with the business part of BEIS. So a really big machinery of government change, and it's I think interesting to talk about here. One, to say that it really happens from the point of the government announcement. So that was, I think, 7th of February. But given it was so late in the financial year, BEIS agreed with Treasury that we'd report as BEIS for 22-23, so we could report on their estimates that had been laid, and that, you know, for clear line of sight reporting, it made sense to stay as the BEIS consolidation group for 22-23 and then split up into 23-24. And the other thing that I'll say about that is it's kind of a quite fascinating process to go through. I've been through restructures in the private sector when it's announced and confirmed, kind of people know what the structure looks like and what's going to happen. For this machinery of government change, I think there was some foresight, as both in the Conservative leadership campaign in the summer before, both candidates had talked about creating a Department of Energy in response to the energy crisis. But yeah, so kind of it wasn't that much of a surprise, but I think the timing was a bit of a surprise, and it's a very top-down restructure. So it starts off with the permanent secretary being allocated, and then they pick their COOs, FDs, and work very much down the structure. And then at the sort of bottom end of the structure, it's rather arbitrarily, or certainly in the finance team, it felt there was some work that you could map across, but someone like me who's working in consolidation, it's quite arbitrarily, this person go here, and just trying to spread the resource evenly across the team, and lots of gaps in the team. So that's resourcing, I think, is very much a challenge going into 23-24. And I think the NAO are quite under-resourced at the moment. That was something that we saw across the group. So that gives you a bit of a flavour of financial reporting. So now I'll hand over to my lovely colleague, Michelle.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for the FCCA Central Government Special, and thanks to Astrid for inviting me to speak at this session. So for those that don't know me, my name is Michelle Gurung. I work at the Ministry of Defence in London. I've been there for 26 years. I've just recently changed roles a few weeks ago, where I was a finance business partner, and now I'm working as an investigating accountant. Next slide, please, Astrid. I'm just going to talk about finance business partnering today. So just to give you a little bit of insight about the role as a FBP, as it's known as. So the finance business partner, they need to understand the business, what its strategy is, its objectives, what it's trying to achieve, what their risks are, and basically how it works. So you need to have an understanding of that, so that when you're doing your monthly forecast meetings with the business deputy directors or the directors, you have an understanding of that they are meeting their objectives and their business plans. We also conduct the annual budget cycle work, which is basically the work that business say they need all these resources to deliver their objectives. So we need to ensure that the resources are aligned to the delivery plans, and that long and short term implications of changes to the plan are anticipated and addressed in good time. As an FBP, you do challenge the business on decisions that they make, especially on affordability and value for money issues. We're also there to support them. So essentially, we need to prioritise and promote the use of robust financial data in their decision making, and use that data effectively to provide insight to them. So normally when they do their forecast every month, we provide them with a monthly management reporting pack that basically gives them what their monthly forecast is for that AP, which is their accounting period. And we give them what are the variances from the previous month, explaining what's changed, and also for their overall forecast for the year, tell them what the movements are and explain why that is. That's normally to the directors after we've had monthly chats with the business areas. When I was an FBP, and I looked after about 8 business areas, so you're looking after quite a lot of different stakeholders. So as well as that, we also feed into business cases to make sure that they're developed for all their significant projects and programs. We give them information of different maybe cabinet office thresholds that need to be adhered to, who they need to engage with, give them realistic expectations of how long the process takes, especially if they're buying in services that are got more rigorous controls over it. It can take some time. So we just manage their expectations and try and ensure that the business cases are provided in enough time to allow their resources and the contracts to be tendered for and signed in time for when they need that resources to be in place. You're also seen as a business and user focused expert, so you're invited to their senior leadership teams, and you have a seat at the table. They're obviously seen as a subject matter expert from the finance point of view, and a lot of the times you don't always know the answers, but you can take it away, and they see you as a trusted expert, so that you can essentially go back to them and provide them valued input into decisions that the business need to make. So we help them balance the wider perspectives with an understanding of the local delivery priorities and pressures. So as an FBP, you're also negotiating trade-offs as well. So the business may say, okay, we're going to stop doing this, but we want to start doing Y, and you need to have a look at the forecast and say, right, okay, have we got enough resources to do that? We maybe also try and identify synergies in other parts of the department that we're aware of. But essentially, our role as an FBP is to ensure that finance is positioned at the heart of decision making. Next slide, please, Astrid. So what skills are required for a business partner? So this is what I found out myself. We would need to have some finance experience and knowledge of finance, or experience in finance. Just because you are seen as the subject matter expert in the room, you're relied a lot upon by the business, and you're also engaging with quite senior people within the department. You need to have strong communication and influencing skills. What you do a lot of engagement with the business. You're also delivering a lot of presentations, especially the management information packs to very senior people within the department. You need to have influencing skills as well, so that if a department wants to do something, can essentially say to them, yeah, we understand where you're coming from, and we know that that's what you would like to do, but at the moment the resources aren't there. Potentially we could postpone something, and then we can start this, or we'll maybe postpone the project that you're proposing and wait until the following year. So that's the kind of conversations that you have with the business. We do strategic planning and reporting and analysis skills. So obviously good Excel skills are needed. Obviously an understanding of the government planning cycle. So essentially you need to understand that, how that works. Reporting skills. So we obviously do a lot of presentations, so PowerPoint, and analysis skills is basically just to interpret what's happening in the forecast and be able to identify any issues coming up, having a look at historic spend and seeing how that's impacting your budget. So you need to have a look at that. You also need to have good stakeholder management, because not only do you collaborate with your business areas, you also need to collaborate across all areas of finance, also with commercial, your HR business partners, and policy holders, so the ones who look after the finance policy, essentially. So you need to obviously have a wide range of skills to be able to speak with them and pull on their advice, when you need to. You do deliver at pace. It's a very reactive role. It's very fast paced, because obviously you've got the forecast cycle. You've also so that's monthly, and it tends to happen. So the first week of the month is always pretty manic, and it's just a really busy role. Lots going on, so you do need to be able to deliver at pace. Next slide, please, Astrid. What are the challenges of an FBP? So I was an FBP for 2.5 years. And the challenges that I found personally for me was just really building the trusted relationships with the business. So for those that aren't aware, in government, well, in the Ministry of Defence, we're just going through the Finance Functional Leadership programme. So finance business partners and the finance operations, and you've got different strands of specialisms that deal with different parts of the business, different parts of finance. So that was just brought on board in autumn last year. So we were trying to educate the business, just to let them know that we were a valuable resource that was there for them. So, and obviously you need to try and get a seat at the table. So with the senior leadership team meetings, key meetings, especially in projects and programmes that are upcoming, especially large HR systems. I was involved with both projects on them, so it's just having a seat at that table and understanding what's happening with the business, be able to give them advice there and then. And another one is just getting buy-in from the business. So I would say it's just really being able to influence the business that you are a valuable resource, really, and you know that you can help them rather than hinder them. So I don't know if most of you are aware, sometimes finance are seen as blockers, but what we're trying to do is say, yeah, we've got a can-do attitude, we're here to support you, and try and make life easier for you. So that we're involved at an earlier stage and able to resolve any issues or problems rather than involving finance at the latter stage when sometimes it's quite late. And so that is some of the challenges. Obviously, resources. I'm sure most of you are aware, so there's recruitment challenges. So like all departments, you're normally covering people when they're off, or you're sometimes just taking on extra departments. So it's just having, you know, being asked to do more work until obviously the extra staff come in or people come back from leave. Also with inflation, it's having the business basically delivering their objectives, you know, with not as much money as they would like to have. So it's just really managing budgets as well. So next slide, please, Astrid. Training. What training would you say that it would FBP? So for me, in my old job, finance skills certificate was required. That covers everything in finance, from forecasting to the annual budget cycle. It just takes you through parliamentary controls. It's lots of modules that are really useful. Excel training, because you're looking at very large and complex spreadsheets. Communicating and influencing courses I found really valuable. So verbal, written communications, verbal communications, and just really the influencing courses are again, they just tie up with the key skills that are needed for an FBP. And there is FBP qualifications there that you can do. So it is yeah, worthwhile doing the training. It just helps build your understanding and helps ease you into the role. Next slide, please, Astrid. I've just added here a few additional useful links that you might find helpful. So it's just basically, there is a government website that talks about finance, business partner and government. So there you can look at the different finance roles, finance, business partner roles, and they go from different grades, say from an ACO to a grade 6. I've also included the FCCA FBP article, which is a useful insight into the finance business partner. Also, I've added a link there if you're interested in a role in government. There is vacancies on the civil service jobs, so I've listed links to them there, and there's a AB article in ACCA also linking to FBPs. That's me. Thank you. Over to you, Astrid.
Thank you so much, Anna and Michelle, for the very comprehensive overview of your roles within central government. It's certainly a real eye-opener. Interesting in terms of both sides sharing you know, the need for skills such as communication, good communication, delivering at pace came up quite a few times. Certainly the strategic thinking and the stakeholder management. So both those presentations really highlighted the need to have good technical knowledge as well as good communication skills, good stakeholder management, and that working at pace. It's quite a dynamic environment. So thank you both for that overview.